Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into the world of large multimodal models, LMMs, right?
Exactly. These are the AI systems that understand different types of data together, think text and images combined.
And they're moving beyond just, spotting cats online. We're seeing them applied to pretty serious scientific problems, physics, chemistry, biology.
That's right. But the big question is, how well do they actually understand the science? Is it deep comprehension or just clever pattern matching?
Yeah, because getting a high score on some general test, it doesn't tell you everything, does it?
Not at all. We really need to break down their abilities, see where they shine, and probably more importantly, where they stumble when things get scientifically complex.
Absolutely. Which brings us to this really interesting paper we're looking at today. It's called SciVerse, Unveiling the Knowledge Comprehension and Visual Reasoning of LMMs on Multimodal Scientific Problems.
And the title says it all, really. It's not just about the final score. It's about digging into how these LMMs handle scientific tasks.
Okay, so what are the core things they're looking at?
Well, they focus on three key dimensions. First, scientific knowledge comprehension. Do the models actually know the relevant science?
Right. Like, do they have the facts?
Exactly. Second, multimodal content interpretation. How good are they at reading diagrams, graphs, and integrating that visual info with the text?
Super important for science.
Definitely. And third, chain of thought reasoning co. That's, where the model shows it's working step by step. They want to see if that reasoning is actually sound.
And to test all this, they couldn't just use existing stuff. They built something new.
Yeah, they created a whole new benchmark called SciVerse, which is honestly a pretty big deal for the field.
Okay, tell us about CyVerse. What makes it special?
So it's comprehensive. We're talking 5,735 test instances. These come from over 1,100 carefully selected original problems.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. And here's the clever part. Each original problem gets adapted into 5 distinct versions.
5 versions. Why so many?
It lets them probe different facets. The difficulty ranges too, from high school up to college level. It gives a much clearer picture than just one type of question.
Okay, I see. And it covers different scientific areas.
Oh, yeah. It's split across physics, about 2,000 questions there. Chemistry, nearly 1,900. And biology, around 1,850. Plus, they're broken down further into 21 specific scientific topics.
So really granular detail.
Exactly. You can see not just good at science, but, struggles with thermodynamics diagrams or strong on genetic principles.
Where did the initial questions come from?
They built upon existing public data sets, things like SimQA, MMMU, CMMMU, but then they had 8 PhD-level science experts vet, select, and refine them.
So proper scientific rigor went into building the test itself.
Absolutely. And they standardized everything into multiple choice using English text, often with LaTeX for all of the math and formulas.
Okay, sounds really robust.
Yeah.
Let's dive into those 3 dimensions then. First up, knowledge comprehension. Why is it so vital to isolate that?
Well, think about it. If a model gets a physics problem wrong, why did it get it wrong? Was it because it didn't know Newton's laws or because it couldn't apply them correctly in the reasoning steps?
Okay. Knowing versus reasoning errors.
Precisely. Different problems require different fixes. So to get a handle on this, they designed 3 specific versions of the questions just focused on knowledge.
What are these versions?
First is knowledge free. This one basically strips out all the background science from the text. You just get the core question, the conditions, and maybe a diagram.
So it forces the model to rely purely on what it learned during training. It's internal knowledge.
Exactly. It's a direct test of that embedded knowledge.
Okay, what's next?
Then you have knowledge light. This adds just a little hint, a small knowledge cue into the question text. Maybe it mentions the name of a theorem, like using Boyle's law, or refers to a specific formula concept.
Like a little nudge. Does reminding it of the topic help?
That's what they're testing. Does a small prompt help it access and use the right knowledge?
Got it. And the third one?
That's knowledge rich. Here, they put detailed scientific info right into the question text. Specific equations, how theorems apply, maybe even some steps.
Almost like mini lesson included with the problem.
Yeah, exactly. It tests if giving the model all the background info helps it perform better, even if its internal knowledge might be a bit shaky.
That's a really smart way to tease apart the knowledge aspect.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move to the second dimension. Multimodal interpretation. Why the focus on visuals in science?
Well, so much science relies on visuals, right? Physics diagrams, chemical structures, biological pathways, they're everywhere. If an LMM can't read these visuals and connect them to the text properly,
It's going to struggle with real scientific material, textbooks, papers.
precisely. A lot of older tests were very text-heavy, which isn't how science always works.
So how did CyVerse test this visual understanding?
They made two vision-focused versions. The first is vision-rich. They took the knowledge light version, but then moved most of the conditions, the givens of the problem, out of the text and annotated them directly onto the diagram.
So the model has to look at the picture carefully to even understand what the problem is asking.
Exactly. It forces reliance on visual interpretation, much more like looking at a figure in a research paper.
Makes sense. And the other vision version?
That one's even tougher. Vision only. Here, the entire question, the conditions, the core question itself is embedded within the diagram. There's no separate text input at all.
Wow. Just an image with the whole problem inside it.
Yep. Think about scanning a page from an old textbook or looking at a complex infographic that poses a question. It really pushes visual perception and, importantly, optical character recognition, or OCR.
OCR within a potentially complex scientific diagram.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see how that would be extremely challenging.
It absolutely is. And the results, which we'll get to, really highlight this. So that brings us to the third dimension, chain of thought reasoning. We know COT can help models, but how did they evaluate the quality of that thinking?
Right, because just getting the model to output steps doesn't mean the steps are actually correct or logical. They needed a finer grained look.
That's exactly it. A wrong final answer might still have some correct reasoning steps, or a right answer could come from faulty logic sometimes. So they came up with a new evaluation strategy using GPT-4, actually.
Using one AI to evaluate another? How did that work?
It's a two-stage process. First, GPT-4o takes the reasoning steps produced by the model being tested and categorizes each step
Categorizes how?
into two main types relevant for science. Knowledge review steps. That's where the model states a fact, a definition, a formula it needs. Let's call that K.
Okay, we're calling it knowledge.
Right. And logical deduction steps, where it's actually applying logic, doing calculations, making inferences based on that knowledge.
So distinguishing between stating FA and actually using it to calculate a force.
Precisely. Then comes the second stage, stepwise evaluation. GPT-4o judges each step, was it correct or incorrect? This lets them pinpoint where the reasoning went wrong. Was it a knowledge error or a logic error?
That's much more revealing than just pass-fail on the final answer.
Absolutely. And they use this to calculate scores. PsychoTK reflects the accuracy of the knowledge steps. PsychoTL reflects the accuracy of the logic steps.
Psycho-knowledge and psycho-logic.
Exactly. And the average of those gives the overall psycho score a much richer measure of reasoning quality.
Okay, this whole setup, SciVerse,
Yeah.
the different versions, the detailed Gakote evaluation sounds incredibly thorough. So what did they actually find when they tested various LMMs, open source and closed source?
Well, some really clear patterns emerged. One key thing was how the models responded to the knowledge variations. Open source models got a much bigger performance boost when more knowledge was provided in the text.
Meaning they improved a lot going from knowledge-free to knowledge-rich.
Yeah, significantly more than the closed source models did. The closed source ones like GPT-4V, GPT-4o, the Claude models, Gemini 1.5 Pro, they tended to perform better overall and more consistently across those knowledge levels.
Suggesting they already have a stronger internal grasp of the scientific knowledge needed?
That seems to be the case. And it lines up with them generally getting higher PsychoTK scores. Their knowledge recall steps were more accurate.
Interesting. What about the visual side?
Another clear difference. The open source models took a bigger hit in performance when information moved from the text to the diagram, going from, say, knowledge-free to vision-rich.
So they struggled more with interpreting the diagrams.
It seems so. Suggest limitations in their visual encoding, or maybe the cross-modal understanding, integrating text and image. The closed source models, while not perfect, showed relatively stronger visual perception here.
Okay, and that super hard vision-only version.
That was tough for everyone. It caused the biggest performance drop across the board, even for the top closed source models. It really highlighted weaknesses in OCR for scientific text within images, and just generally interpreting questions presented purely visually.
So reading a science problem straight from an image is still a major bottleneck. That has big implications for real-world use, like reading scanned documents.
Huge implications. And finally, the chain of thought analysis. The closed source models generally showed stronger reasoning capabilities.
How did they measure that? wasn't just the final answer accuracy.
No, it was looking at that gap between the final answer accuracy and the quality of the reasoning steps. Psycho. For closed source models, there was often a bigger gap, meaning even when they got the final answer wrong, their intermediate steps were, on average, more logically sound or scientifically plausible compared to the open source models.
So their thinking process was often better, even if they made a slip up at the end.
That's the idea. It suggests a better grasp of the scientific reasoning process itself.
Fascinating findings. Okay, let's shift gears into our novel notions segment. Based on all this, what are some cool research ideas or future directions?
Well, given how much trouble the models had with the visual stuff, especially vision only, one really obvious but important direction is developing specialized visual encoders just for scientific diagrams.
Tailored for science visuals. What would that involve?
Think about it. Scientific diagrams have their own language. Mathematical symbols, chemical structures, specific ways of drawing biological processes. General vision models might miss the nuances.
And the OCR needs to handle weird fonts, symbols, dense labels.
Exactly. So you could train encoders specifically on massive data sets of scientific images. Maybe even use synthetic data, create diagrams with different levels of noise, clutter, distortion, to make the models more robust for real-world messiness, like scanned papers or handwritten notes.
If that works, LMMs could start making sense of figures in old papers, lab notebooks.
It could unlock a huge amount of scientific knowledge that's currently hard for AI to access. Imagine that.
Yeah, powerful stuff. What's another idea?
The other big takeaway relates to knowledge. Remember how performance jumped, especially for open source models when knowledge was provided?
Right, the knowledge-rich version helped a lot.
So another exciting direction is integrating external scientific knowledge bases directly into the LMM's reasoning process, dynamically.
You mean instead of just relying on what it was trained on, it could look things up?
Precisely. As it's working through a problem using chain of thought, especially in those knowledge-free or elite scenarios, it could actively query databases like Wolfram Alpha for equations, PubChem for chemical data, maybe even literature databases.
So if it gets stuck on a fact or formula, it could ask an external source during its reasoning.
Yeah. Imagine it tackling a complex chemistry problem and querying a reaction database mid-thought. This could massively boost the accuracy of those knowledge review steps, the psycho-TK score.
And potentially lead to new discoveries by combining its reasoning with vast external knowledge.
That's the dream, right? Letting the AI explore and connect information from different scientific sources in real time. Of course, there are challenges ensuring the external sources are reliable, integrating them smoothly, but the potential impact on scientific discovery is just immense.
Those are two really compelling research avenues, definitely stemming directly from the challenges identified by CyVerse.
Absolutely. This benchmark, CyVerse, it really gives us a much more nuanced way to understand what these LMMs can and crucially cannot yet do in science.
It highlights the gaps, especially in deep knowledge, visual interpretation, and truly robust reasoning, particularly for open source models and these vision-heavy tasks.
Yeah, and those findings are gold dust for researchers figuring out what to work on next to build genuinely science-savvy AI.
Well, this has been a fantastic deep dive. The SciVerse paper really pushes our understanding forward. It shows the incredible progress, but also, the hurdles still ahead for AI in science.
It really does. It's not just about scores anymore. It's about the depth of understanding, the quality of reasoning. The journey to AI that can truly partner in scientific discovery is ongoing, and this work gives us some vital signposts.
Definitely food for thought. And for our listeners who want to explore the paper in more detail, check out the link in the description below. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.